The greatest miracles in the world often happen because someone chooses kindness without ever expecting to know whose life they have saved. Every first Tuesday of the month, before the city had fully awakened, Elliot Hayes walked through the sliding glass doors of the Midtown Regional Blood Center carrying the same worn canvas backpack and the same quiet smile. The receptionist no longer asked for his name because everyone already knew him. They simply greeted him with a warm good morning, handed him a clipboard, and thanked him for coming back. Elliot always answered the same way. If my blood helps someone see another sunrise, that's enough for me. He never asked where his donation went. He never wondered who needed it. For him, kindness wasn't a transaction. It was a habit, as natural as breathing. At 26, Elliot worked as a laboratory technician at a small diagnostic clinic on the east side of Chicago. His apartment overlooked an elevated train line that rattled every morning before 6, serving as a louder alarm clock than the one beside his bed. His life wasn't glamorous. He drove a 12-year-old sedan with peeling paint, packed homemade lunches to save money, and spent most evenings reading medical journals borrowed from the public library instead of buying expensive subscriptions. Yet anyone who knew him would describe him as genuinely content. Years earlier, after losing his mother to a rare blood disorder, Elliot had made a quiet promise that if he ever had the chance to help another family avoid the same heartbreak, he would never say no. That promise had become a calendar reminder repeating every 4 weeks without fail. The nurses often joked that he was more reliable than the building's clock. They laughed together as they prepared the donation equipment, and Elliot always asked about their families before settling comfortably into the familiar reclining chair. While the collection bag slowly filled with the deep crimson lifeline flowing from his arm, he usually stared through the large window overlooking the parking lot. Parents hurried children into school. Delivery trucks unloaded supplies. Morning sunlight reflected across rows of windshields. Ordinary moments passed outside while inside another quiet act of hope unfolded without applause or recognition. Once the donation was complete, he accepted a bottle of orange juice and a package of peanut butter crackers, thanked everyone by name, and headed straight to work as though nothing remarkable had happened. He never accepted the modest compensation offered through the Special Donor Assistance Program. Every single time, he signed the waiver declining payment. Someone else probably needs it more, he would say with an easy smile before leaving. None of the staff realized that his blood wasn't simply rare. It was exceptionally compatible with an experimental treatment reserved for only one pediatric patient whose identity remained hidden under strict confidentiality agreements. Several miles away, behind the polished glass walls of Sterling Children's Medical Center, a 7-year-old boy named Noah Sterling slept peacefully beneath a blanket covered with tiny blue stars. Clear tubing connected carefully monitored equipment while soft beeping echoed through the private intensive care suite. On the wall beside his bed hung colorful drawings of rockets, dinosaurs, and baseball stadiums, each carefully taped there by nurses determined to make the room feel less like a hospital. His condition remained fragile, but every monthly transfusion bought him another stretch of ordinary childhood. Another birthday, another chance to laugh, another opportunity to dream about playing Little League someday. Outside the room stood security personnel, physicians, and legal representatives whose schedules revolved around protecting one vulnerable child. What almost no one knew was that the transfusions keeping Noah alive depended almost entirely on one anonymous donor who had never seen the boy's face. The donor identification file remained sealed inside multiple encrypted hospital databases, accessible only through special authorization. Even Noah's father had never been told the name. Late that afternoon, after Elliot returned to work and resumed examining routine blood samples beneath fluorescent laboratory lights, a senior records administrator entered a secure archive room deep inside Sterling Children's Medical Center. She unlocked a steel cabinet, removed a thick confidential folder marked with bright red security labels, confirmed the next scheduled transfusion date, and quietly returned the file to its shelf. Before switching off the light, her eyes paused on a single stamped instruction printed across the front page in bold black letters. Keep donor ID classified. Adrian Sterling had built an empire by believing that every problem could be solved with enough discipline, enough intelligence, and enough determination. Yet every evening, all of that power stopped at the entrance to the pediatric intensive care unit. The boardrooms, the shareholders, the billion-dollar acquisitions, and the magazine covers meant absolutely nothing the moment he stepped into Noah's room. He always arrived before 7 in the evening, even if it meant ending meetings early or flying across 3 states in a single day. His assistants had long since learned that nothing could be scheduled after 6 o'clock because those hours belonged to his son alone. Noah greeted him with the same bright smile no matter how exhausted he felt. Some evenings they built imaginary cities with colorful building blocks. Other nights they read adventure novels together, taking turns giving funny voices to every character until Noah laughed so hard that the nurses peeked through the doorway just to make sure everything was all right. Adrian treasured those moments because they allowed him to forget the machines quietly monitoring every heartbeat. To the outside world, he was the cold and calculating chief executive officer of Sterling Biotech. To Noah, he was simply Dad. Dr. Amelia Brooks often waited until Noah had fallen asleep before discussing medical updates. She respected the small ritual between father and son and never interrupted it unless absolutely necessary. That Thursday evening, she gently closed the hospital room door behind them and led Adrian into a quiet consultation room overlooking the city skyline. Her expression was calm, but her eyes carried a concern she could no longer hide. She spread several laboratory reports across the conference table before speaking. The latest transfusion stabilized Noah exactly as we expected, she said softly. But we have a growing problem. Adrian remained silent, waiting for the explanation. The donor's blood continues to produce extraordinary compatibility. We have searched every national registry again. We have not found another donor with matching results. Adrian folded his hands together. Then expand the search internationally. Dr. Brooks slowly shook her head. We already have. We are not running out of money. We are running out of certainty. She pointed toward a chart showing Noah's treatment schedule over the previous 2 years. Every 4 weeks, the same remarkable improvement appeared with almost perfect consistency. As long as the donations continue, Noah has hope. If they stop, she paused before finishing the sentence. His condition could become critical within weeks. Adrian stared at the reports without blinking. For the first time in years, he realized his son's future rested entirely in the hands of someone he had never met. Someone who probably had no idea that a little boy eagerly waiting to play baseball one day depended upon their generosity. Who is the donor? He asked quietly. Dr. Brooks hesitated. I still cannot access the identity. The confidentiality order is higher than my authorization level. Adrian frowned. I own the company funding half of this research. Even so, she answered. The records were sealed under an independent ethics protocol before the treatment program began. Adrian stood and walked toward the window. Below, thousands of headlights flowed through downtown Chicago like rivers of white and red. Somewhere among those countless people was the stranger who had unknowingly become the most important person in his son's life. Find them, he said without turning around. Offer them every medical resource they could ever need. Create a scholarship. Establish a charitable foundation. Whatever it takes. Dr. Brooks lowered her eyes. We cannot thank someone we cannot identify. Later that night, after Adrian kissed Noah on the forehead and quietly wished him pleasant dreams, he walked alone through the nearly empty hospital corridor. His footsteps echoed against polished floors while the words from the consultation repeated endlessly in his mind. He had spent years protecting Noah from every danger within his control. Now he faced something entirely different. Hope itself had become anonymous, and somewhere beyond the walls of the hospital, the unknown person carrying that hope continued living an ordinary life, completely unaware that an entire future depended upon the simple decision to return again next month. The first Tuesday of the month arrived with gray clouds hanging low over Chicago, but for the first time in 2 years, the familiar reclining chair inside the Midtown Regional Blood Center remained empty. At 8 o'clock that morning, the receptionist glanced toward the entrance, expecting the soft chime of the automatic doors and the quiet smile she had come to associate with perfect reliability. 8:15 passed, then 8:30. By 9 o'clock, one of the nurses checked the appointment list again, convinced there had been a scheduling mistake. There had not. Elliot Hayes had never missed a donation. Not once. Concern quietly replaced routine. One nurse attempted to call the number listed in his file, but the call went unanswered. She left a gentle voicemail asking him to return the call whenever he was able. The blood center continued operating as usual, yet an uneasy silence settled among the staff. None of them realized that only a few miles away, Elliot lay asleep in a hospital recovery room after a traffic accident the previous evening. The collision had not been life-threatening, but his left shoulder had been injured, several ribs were bruised, and his physician had strictly prohibited blood donation until his body fully recovered. Elliot drifted in and out of sleep, completely unaware that anyone had tried to contact him. His mobile phone, damaged during the accident, remained powered off inside a plastic evidence bag waiting to be returned after repairs. Across the city at Sterling Children's Medical Center, Noah arrived for his scheduled treatment with the same hopeful smile he carried every month. He brought a sketchbook filled with drawings of rockets because he wanted to show his father a new design for a spaceship that could fly all the way to Mars. Adrian smiled warmly as Noah explained every tiny detail, but beneath that smile lingered growing anxiety after receiving an unexpected message requesting his immediate presence in the transfusion department. Dr. Amelia Brooks met him outside the treatment suite. Her expression immediately told him something had gone wrong. "The scheduled blood shipment has not arrived," she explained carefully. Adrian frowned. "Is it delayed?" She slowly shook her head. The donation never happened. For several long seconds, neither of them spoke. The quiet hum of medical equipment seemed louder than ever. Dr. Brooks continued in a calm but measured voice. "We have already begun searching every available reserve. None of the stored units match the compatibility we need." Adrian looked through the glass window toward Noah, who sat happily coloring planets with blue and silver markers, completely unaware that the adults around him were fighting against time. "How long do we have?" Adrian asked. "We can stabilize him temporarily," Dr. Brooks replied. "But without another compatible donation, his condition could deteriorate much faster than before." While physicians searched regional blood banks and contacted specialists across the country, another conversation unfolded behind closed administrative doors. Victor Kane, the executive director overseeing the hospital's experimental treatment program, quietly reviewed the latest reports before locking them inside a secure cabinet. One administrator nervously asked whether they should notify Sterling Biotech that the donor had disappeared. Victor immediately rejected the suggestion. "No," he answered firmly. "If word spreads that this entire program depends on one anonymous donor, investors, regulators, and the media will start asking questions none of us are prepared to answer." He instructed the staff to classify the missed donation as a temporary logistical delay, while internal records were quietly revised to minimize attention. Several employees exchanged uncertain glances, but no one challenged his decision. That evening, Adrian remained beside Noah's hospital bed longer than usual, reading every page of the space adventure they had started together. Noah eventually drifted to sleep, holding the sketchbook against his chest. Adrian gently adjusted the blanket before stepping into the dark hallway. He stared through the large windows overlooking the city lights, feeling something he had not experienced in years. Helplessness. Somewhere in Chicago, the stranger who had faithfully appeared month after month had suddenly vanished without explanation, and with every passing hour, the invisible thread that had quietly connected two completely different lives for 2 years was beginning to unravel. The following morning, Adrian Sterling canceled every executive meeting on his calendar for the first time in nearly a decade. His senior staff watched in stunned silence as their famously disciplined chief executive officer walked past the conference room without saying a word. Nothing inside Sterling Biotech mattered until he understood why the anonymous donor had disappeared. Instead of returning to corporate headquarters, Adrian drove directly to Sterling Children's Medical Center and requested unrestricted access to every department connected to Noah's treatment. Dr. Amelia Brooks met him outside the research wing carrying a tablet filled with records that seemed increasingly incomplete. "I reviewed every authorized file again last night," she admitted. "Someone has systematically restricted access to the donor information far beyond what normal privacy regulations require." Adrian studied her expression carefully. "You believe this was intentional?" She nodded. "Confidentiality is one thing. Erasing audit trails is something completely different." Together, they entered the secure medical records office where shelves of archived files stretched across the room. Every digital request pointed toward the same encrypted identification number, yet every supporting document had disappeared from the normal database. The only remaining references were scattered timestamps showing that someone had repeatedly modified access permissions over the past 2 years. Adrian folded his arms. Who approved these changes? Dr. Brooks hesitated before answering. Officially, every authorization came through executive administration. They both knew exactly who supervised that division. Victor Kane welcomed them into his office with practiced professionalism and an easy smile. His desk was perfectly organized, and framed awards lined the wall behind him. I understand everyone is concerned, Victor said calmly. Our team is already searching for replacement donors. Adrian remained standing. I did not ask about replacement donors. I asked why every record connected to the original donor has been hidden. Victor did not lose his composure. The confidentiality agreement was designed to protect a private citizen from unwanted attention. Imagine what would happen if someone discovered that one individual had become essential to an experimental treatment. Reporters would appear at their home. Advocacy groups would pressure them. Their life would never be normal again. The explanation sounded reasonable, yet something about Victor's confidence only deepened Adrian's suspicion. After leaving the office, Dr. Brooks quietly lowered her voice. He answered every question except the one you actually asked. Adrian nodded. Then we stopped asking permission. That afternoon, they moved beyond official files and began tracing forgotten details instead. Old laboratory shipment logs, handwritten nursing schedules, maintenance reports, and archived security footage became their new source of evidence. Most recordings had already been deleted under routine retention policies, but one outdated backup server still contained fragmented camera footage from the blood center loading area. Hours passed while technicians restored damaged files frame by frame. Finally, a grainy image appeared on the monitor. Every 4 weeks, at nearly the same time each month, the same modest sedan entered the parking lot before sunrise. The driver's face remained hidden by windshield glare, but one detail stood out clearly each time. Around the driver's wrist was a woven blue bracelet with a tiny silver compass charm that reflected the morning light as he stepped from the car, carrying a faded canvas backpack. Dr. Brooks leaned closer to the screen. That bracelet appears in every recording. Adrian stared at the frozen image. It is the first real clue we have. Meanwhile, several floors above them, Victor Kane received an automated alert informing him that archived surveillance files had been accessed. His expression remained calm as he closed the notification, but after a brief pause he quietly instructed an information technology manager to begin deleting every remaining backup connected to the donor program before anyone else could uncover what had been carefully hidden for the past 2 years. Early the next morning, Adrian returned to the blood center, carrying nothing more than a printed photograph taken from the restored security footage. The image was blurry, but the woven blue bracelet with its tiny silver compass charm stood out clearly enough to catch someone's memory. He quietly showed it to the receptionist who had greeted the anonymous donor for the past 2 years. At first she hesitated, respecting every privacy rule she had been trained to follow, but after hearing about Noah's worsening condition, her expression softened. I cannot give you confidential records, she said gently, but I can tell you that I have seen that bracelet many times. She paused before adding, the young man who wore it always came early, always smiled, and never accepted donor compensation. Adrian felt hope return for the first time in days. Do you know where he worked? The receptionist slowly shook her head. No, but one of our volunteers once mentioned seeing him wearing a laboratory identification badge. That single detail became the next piece of the puzzle. By noon, Adrian and Dr. Amelia Brooks had narrowed their search to diagnostic laboratories that regularly partnered with regional hospitals. They spent hours visiting facilities across the city, speaking with supervisors and reviewing employee directories whenever permission was granted. Most conversations ended politely but without results. Then, shortly before 4 o'clock, they entered a modest diagnostic clinic on the east side of Chicago. It was smaller than the research centers Adrian normally visited, with aging equipment, freshly painted walls, and employees who greeted every patient by name. While Dr. Brooks spoke with the clinic director, Adrian noticed a familiar flash of blue through the glass window of the laboratory. A young technician wearing protective gloves carefully organized blood samples beneath bright fluorescent lights. Around his wrist rested a woven blue bracelet with a tiny silver compass charm. Adrian stopped walking. Every instinct told him they had finally found the person they had been searching for. When the technician finished labeling a tray of specimens, he removed his gloves and stepped into the hallway. He looked slightly pale, and his left arm remained supported by a medical brace beneath his jacket. Before Adrian could speak, the clinic director smiled warmly. "Elliot, someone would like to ask you a few questions." Elliot looked up with quiet curiosity. "Of course." Adrian found himself unexpectedly struggling to form the words he had rehearsed all morning. Standing before him was not the mysterious figure he had imagined over countless sleepless nights. Elliot looked ordinary in every possible way. Kind eyes, tired smile, simple clothes. Someone who blended effortlessly into the crowd. Adrian finally introduced himself. "My name is Adrian Sterling." Elliot politely offered a handshake. "It is nice to meet you, Mr. Sterling." There was no recognition in his voice. Adrian searched his face for any sign that he understood the connection between them, but there was none. "Have you been donating blood at Midtown Regional Blood Center for the past 2 years?" Elliot nodded without hesitation. "Yes, I usually go every month, although I missed my last appointment because of a traffic accident." He glanced at the brace on his shoulder with an apologetic smile. "My doctor said I need a little more time before I can donate again." Adrian exchanged a brief glance with Dr. Brooks before asking the question that mattered most. "Do you know where your donations have been going?" Elliot looked genuinely surprised. "No, I assumed they were distributed through the regional blood bank, like everyone else's." Dr. Brooks gently explained that one pediatric patient had depended on his uniquely compatible blood for nearly 2 years. Elliot listened in stunned silence, his eyes widening with every sentence. "You mean?" he whispered. "Someone has been receiving my donations every month." Adrian nodded slowly. "My son. You have been giving him the chance to keep living, and you never even knew his name." Elliot lowered himself into the nearest chair, overwhelmed not by fear, but by disbelief. "I never expected anything," he said quietly. "I only hoped it might help someone." Adrian's composure finally gave way. For the first time in many years, the powerful chief executive officer bowed his head before another person. "Then please allow me to say what I should have said long ago. Thank you for saving my son. Thank you for giving our family 2 more years together. I will never forget your kindness." The news spread much faster than anyone expected. Although Adrian and Dr. Amelia Brooks had carefully kept Elliot's identity private after their meeting, rumors began circulating inside the hospital within hours. A rare donor had finally been found. A child whose condition had remained stable for 2 years had survived because of one extraordinary match. Most employees treated the information with respect, but not everyone shared the same intentions. Victor Kane quietly assembled a confidential report summarizing Elliot's medical history, donation frequency, and genetic compatibility. Instead of protecting the information, he viewed it as something far more valuable. To him, Elliot was no longer a compassionate young man. He had become an irreplaceable biological resource. The following morning, several members of Sterling Biotech's board unexpectedly requested an emergency meeting with Adrian. As he entered the executive conference room, he immediately sensed the unusual atmosphere. Financial reports had been replaced by legal folders, research proposals, and projected headlines displayed across the presentation screen. One board member spoke first. "We have learned that the compatible donor has finally been identified." Adrian remained expressionless. "That information is confidential." Another executive leaned forward. "Which is exactly why we need to discuss it. If this compatibility can be studied further, Sterling Biotech could revolutionize rare blood therapies." Adrian answered without hesitation. "The donor is not a research project." A third executive calmly replied. "No one is suggesting anything inappropriate. We simply believe he should participate in an expanded medical observation program." Adrian recognized the carefully chosen language immediately. Participation sounded voluntary, but he understood how easily pressure could transform kindness into obligation. "The discussion is over," he said firmly. "His privacy will be respected." The room fell silent, but the disappointed expressions around the table made it clear that not everyone agreed with his decision. Meanwhile, Elliot returned to his small apartment after another physical therapy appointment. His shoulder was healing well, although his doctor continued recommending several more weeks before donating again. He spent the afternoon organizing old books and watering the small collection of plants growing beside his living room window. Life still felt wonderfully ordinary despite everything Adrian had revealed the previous day. He had never imagined that one child had depended so heavily upon his monthly donations, and the realization filled him with both gratitude and concern. He hoped Noah was recovering comfortably and silently promised himself that he would return to donating as soon as his physician approved it. Later that evening, his peaceful routine was interrupted by repeated telephone calls from unfamiliar numbers. Some callers claimed to represent charitable organizations. Others introduced themselves as medical researchers interested in speaking with him about a unique opportunity. One message even offered generous financial compensation in exchange for an interview. Confused, Elliot declined every request. He had never spoken publicly about donating blood and could not understand how strangers had learned his name. Across town, Dr. Brooks reviewed hospital network activity after noticing multiple unauthorized searches connected to Elliot's confidential file. Every request originated from administrative accounts linked to Victor Kane's division. She immediately contacted Adrian and shared what she had discovered. Adrian listened quietly before asking a single question. "Can you prove the information was accessed without medical necessity?" "Yes," she answered. "The search history is still there. Someone copied far more than treatment records." Adrian closed his eyes for a brief moment. Everything suddenly became clear. Victor had not simply hidden Elliot's identity for 2 years. Now that the secret had been uncovered, he intended to use it. Adrian rose from his desk and looked through the towering windows of Sterling Biotech headquarters as evening settled over Chicago. Below him, thousands of office workers headed home to their families, completely unaware that one kind-hearted laboratory technician had become the center of a struggle between compassion and ambition. At that moment, Adrian made a decision that surprised even himself. If protecting Elliot meant risking criticism from investors, confronting his own executives, or placing his leadership under intense scrutiny, then so be it. For the first time since founding his company, he chose one person's dignity over the expectations of an entire corporate empire. 3 weeks later, Elliot's physician finally smiled as he reviewed the latest examination results. "Your shoulder has healed well," he said while closing the medical chart. "You can gradually return to normal activities. Just listen to your body and do not push yourself too hard." Elliot thanked him sincerely before leaving the clinic with a quiet sense of relief. The first place he planned to visit the following Tuesday was the Midtown Regional Blood Center. He had spent the past several weeks thinking about Noah far more often than he expected. Although he had only learned the little boy's name recently, knowing that his monthly donations had given a child another chance to laugh, dream, and grow had transformed an ordinary act of kindness into something deeply personal. Early the next morning, Dr. Amelia Brooks called Adrian with urgent news. Noah's latest laboratory results showed an unexpected decline. The temporary treatments had reached their limit, and another compatible transfusion would soon become necessary. Adrian immediately contacted Elliot, making it clear that there was absolutely no pressure to donate before receiving full medical clearance. Elliot listened quietly before answering with calm certainty. "My doctor approved me yesterday. If I can help Noah again, I want to be there." Adrian closed his eyes for a brief moment, overcome by gratitude. "Thank you," he said softly. "Thank you for choosing this even after everything that has happened." A special donation appointment was arranged at Sterling Children's Medical Center under enhanced privacy measures. Only a small medical team knew the schedule, and Dr. Brooks personally supervised every preparation. Elliot arrived carrying the same faded canvas backpack and wearing the familiar blue bracelet with the tiny silver compass charm. Several nurses recognized him immediately, greeting him with heartfelt smiles instead of formal introductions. Before the procedure began, Adrian quietly entered the room. For a few moments, neither man spoke. Finally, Adrian said, "You have already given my son more than I can ever repay. If you have changed your mind, no one here will blame you." Elliot smiled gently. "I came because I wanted to. Kindness only matters when it is freely given." As the donation was completed under careful medical supervision, the atmosphere remained peaceful. Dr. Brooks monitored every reading, ensuring Elliot remained comfortable throughout the process. Once the collection was safely finished, the sealed blood unit was immediately prepared for transfer to Noah's treatment suite. Then everything suddenly changed. A transport coordinator rushed into the laboratory, looking confused. "The blood unit is gone," she said breathlessly. "It was signed out 3 minutes ago, but no authorized nurse collected it." Dr. Brooks immediately checked the electronic tracking system. The signature attached to the transfer was forged using copied credentials. Adrian's expression hardened as he realized exactly what had happened. Security personnel quickly began reviewing surveillance cameras throughout the hospital. Within minutes, they located the missing transport container inside an administrative storage room, where Victor Kane stood waiting with 2 legal representatives and several confidential research documents spread across a conference table. The blood unit remained sealed and properly refrigerated, but Victor calmly blocked the doorway when Adrian arrived. "This treatment can continue," Victor said evenly, "if we establish a long-term clinical partnership with the donor. We need guaranteed access for future research and therapeutic development." Adrian stared at him in disbelief. "You delayed my son's treatment to negotiate?" Victor maintained his composed expression. "I am protecting the future of this program. One donor cannot simply disappear again." Before Adrian could respond, Elliot stepped into the hallway behind Dr. Brooks. He looked at Victor with quiet disappointment rather than anger. "I donated because I wanted to help a child," he said, "not because I wanted anyone to own my kindness." Those simple words seemed to fill the hallway with a silence far heavier than any raised voice. Several hospital employees who had gathered nearby exchanged uneasy glances. They had witnessed enough to understand exactly what had taken place. Dr. Brooks immediately documented every unauthorized action, while hospital compliance officers secured the blood unit and resumed Noah's treatment without further delay. As the sealed container disappeared behind the intensive care doors, Adrian realized that the greatest battle had never been about medicine alone. It had always been about whether compassion would remain a gift freely given or become something others believed they had the right to control. Within an hour, the transfusion was completed without further interruption. Dr. Amelia Brooks remained beside Noah throughout the procedure, carefully monitoring every change until the numbers on the monitors slowly returned to a reassuring rhythm. The tension that had gripped the pediatric intensive care unit for days finally began to lift. Later that evening, Noah opened his eyes with more energy than he had shown in weeks. He looked around the room before smiling at his father. "Dad," he whispered, "I am really hungry." Adrian laughed softly, unable to remember the last time such an ordinary sentence had sounded so extraordinary. Dr. Brooks smiled as well. "That is exactly what I wanted to hear." Over the following days, Noah continued improving. He asked for books instead of sleeping through the afternoon. He wanted to finish another drawing of his imaginary rocket ship. He even convinced one of the nurses to help him measure the hallway, so he could estimate how long it would take to race across it once he was fully recovered. Every small milestone felt like a celebration. While Noah regained his strength, another investigation quietly unfolded behind the scenes. The hospital's compliance office, assisted by independent auditors, reviewed every electronic record connected to the donor program. Dr. Brooks submitted detailed documentation showing unauthorized access, concealed administrative changes, and the deliberate attempt to interfere with a medically necessary treatment. Surveillance recordings, computer activity logs, and internal correspondence all pointed toward the same conclusion. Victor Kane had repeatedly exceeded his authority, placing institutional interests above patient care and donor privacy. Faced with overwhelming evidence, the hospital board immediately removed him from every administrative responsibility, while outside regulators began a formal review of his actions. His research proposals were suspended, his access credentials were revoked, and the confidentiality policies he had manipulated were completely rewritten under independent oversight. The announcement spread quickly throughout the medical center, bringing relief to employees who had quietly questioned previous decisions but never possessed enough information to challenge them. Adrian refused every suggestion to use the situation for corporate publicity. Instead, he held a brief press conference with only one purpose. Standing beside Dr. Brooks, he announced the creation of the Elliot Hayes Rare Blood Foundation, an independent nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting voluntary blood donation, protecting donor privacy, and expanding research through fully informed consent rather than pressure or secrecy. Medical progress should never come at the expense of human dignity, Adrian said. Compassion cannot be demanded. It can only be honored. When reporters asked whether the anonymous donor would appear publicly, Adrian simply smiled and answered, "That decision belongs entirely to him." Elliot politely declined every television interview and magazine request that followed. He continued working at the same neighborhood laboratory, drove the same aging sedan, and still carried the same faded canvas backpack. The only difference was that he now occasionally received handwritten thank you letters from families whose lives had been touched by blood donation after hearing about the foundation's mission. One quiet Saturday afternoon, Adrian invited Elliot to visit Noah outside the intensive care unit for the first time. The hospital garden had just begun blooming with spring flowers, and sunlight filtered gently through rows of young maple trees. Noah sat on a wooden bench wrapped in a light blue sweater, sketchbook balanced on his knees. Adrian knelt beside his son before speaking softly. "There is someone I have wanted you to meet for a very long time." Noah looked up curiously as Elliot approached with an uncertain smile. For several seconds, the little boy simply studied the gentle stranger standing before him. Then Adrian explained, in words simple enough for a child to understand, that Elliot had quietly helped him stay healthy for many months without ever expecting recognition or reward. Noah's eyes grew wide with amazement. He slowly stood, walked across the garden path, and wrapped his small arms around Elliot in a sincere hug. Looking up with a bright smile that carried none of the burdens the adults had endured, he asked the question that brought unexpected tears to both Adrian and Elliot alike. "Would it be all right if I called you family?" 1 year later, the first Tuesday of the month still arrived with quiet certainty, but everything surrounding it had changed. The Midtown Regional Blood Center was brighter, larger, and connected to a nationwide network supported by the Elliot Hayes Rare Blood Foundation. Thousands of new volunteers had registered after hearing stories about how one anonymous act of generosity could change an entire family's future. The foundation never focused on extraordinary medical statistics or dramatic headlines. Instead, every campaign carried the same simple message that Elliot insisted should appear on every poster and every brochure. You may never know whose life you save, and that is perfectly all right. Elliot had accepted a new role as Director of Community Outreach for the Foundation, yet very little about him had truly changed. He still greeted every volunteer personally whenever his schedule allowed. He still remembered nurses by name. He still drove his aging sedan despite Adrian's repeated offers to replace it. Whenever people praised him for becoming the face of a national movement, Elliot simply smiled and reminded them that blood donations had always belonged to ordinary people making ordinary choices. Adrian admired that humility more with every passing day. The man who had once measured success only through financial reports now found himself attending neighborhood blood drives, speaking at public schools, and helping unload folding tables before community events began. His executives occasionally joked that their chief executive officer had become impossible to recognize outside the office because he now spent weekends handing out juice boxes and thank you cards instead of attending exclusive corporate receptions. Adrian never minded the teasing. Somewhere along the journey, he had discovered that influence meant far more when it was used to lift others rather than impress them. Noah's life had changed the most. His health continued improving under carefully monitored treatment, and his physicians celebrated every encouraging milestone. He finally joined a neighborhood Little League team, although Dr. Brooks insisted he wear extra protective gear and avoid overexertion. Noah did not mind. Simply standing on the baseball field with other children felt like winning the championship. Every Saturday after practice, he insisted on stopping by the blood center with Adrian and Elliot because he liked thanking the volunteers personally. Many of them never realized the cheerful boy handing them bottled water had once depended upon strangers they would never meet. To Noah, every donor deserved the same gratitude he had always carried in his heart. On a warm spring afternoon, exactly 1 year after Noah had asked to call Elliot family, Adrian invited him to the original donation room where everything had quietly begun. The familiar reclining chair remained near the large window overlooking the parking lot. The same morning sunlight poured through the glass exactly as it had on countless first Tuesdays before. Nothing about the room appeared extraordinary, Yet all three of them understood that it had become the place where three separate lives had unknowingly become one shared story. Adrian reached into his jacket pocket and removed a small velvet box. Elliot looked at him with surprise before Adrian spoke with complete sincerity. The first time I came searching for you, I wanted to thank the person who had saved my son's life. Somewhere along the way, I realized you also changed mine. You taught me that kindness cannot be purchased, commanded, or negotiated. It can only be answered with honesty. I cannot promise a perfect future, but I can promise that I want to walk through every ordinary day beside you, if you will let me. Elliot's eyes filled with quiet emotion as Adrian opened the box, revealing a simple platinum ring without elaborate decoration. Before Elliot could answer, Noah broke into a wide grin and whispered loudly enough for both of them to hear. I really hope he says yes. Elliot laughed through happy tears before gently taking Adrian's hand. Yes, he answered softly. I would like that very much. Noah cheered so enthusiastically that several nurses peeked into the room, and within moments warm applause echoed through the hallway. As the three of them stepped outside together, sunlight bathed the entrance where hundreds of new donors were arriving for appointments. Along the lobby wall stood a polished glass display honoring volunteers whose quiet generosity had inspired others across the country. At the very end of the list, engraved with the same humility that had defined every choice he ever made, appeared the name Elliot Hayes. He looked at it only briefly before turning toward Adrian and Noah. Together they walked into the bright afternoon, hand in hand, leaving behind the place where hope had first arrived, one quiet donation at a time, and carrying that hope forward as a family. What would you have done if you were in this situation? Tell us in the comments. If you love Alpha and Omega stories filled with passion, loyalty, heartbreak, and second chances, please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next story.